Cocky boxer underestimates Chuck Norris in the ring. The knockout is unforgettable. In the heart of the boxing world, a young fighter named Jason, the Bull, Carter was making waves like no one else had. Jason, just 25 years old, had an undefeated record that had quickly captured the attention of fans and critics alike. He wasn't just winning his matches, he was dominating them, knocking out opponents with ease. With every fight, his confidence grew, and so did his fame. The media called him the future of boxing, and the fans couldn't get enough of his explosive punches and charismatic personality. But it wasn't just his fighting that made Jason stand out. It was his attitude. He was cocky, outspoken, and confident to the point of arrogance. He would show up to press conferences with a swagger, joking with reporters, making bold claims about his upcoming fights, and frequently calling out anyone he considered an opponent. There was no one in the sport that could touch him, he believed. No boxer, no matter how seasoned or experienced, stood a chance against his raw talent and power. Jason was known for his hard punches and his quick reflexes, but it was his mental game that really set him apart. He knew how to get inside his opponent's head. In interviews, he would mock and tease other fighters, even the legends of the sport. He'd laugh at their age and experience, claiming that it didn't matter in the ring. "Age is just a number," Jason often said, "and experience means nothing when you've got raw power and speed. I'm the future, and the future is now." For months, Jason had been calling out older fighters, challenging them to matches. He had already knocked out several contenders who were supposed to be his toughest challenges, leaving them with bruised egos and broken dreams. It seemed as though no one could stop him. That was, until one day, Jason made a bold statement that would shake the world of boxing to its core. During an interview, he was asked about Chuck Norris, the legendary martial artist and former world champion who had long retired from competitive fighting. Jason, with a smirk on his face, casually dismissed Norris as a joke. "Chuck Norris. He's way past his prime," Jason said, laughing as if the idea of fighting Norris was laughable. "He might have been tough once, but now he's just another old man. I'd knock him out in one round. No one can handle me in the ring." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and they didn't go unnoticed. Fans who had once admired Jason's cocky attitude began to wonder if he had gone too far this time. After all, Chuck Norris wasn't just any fighter. He was a legend, someone whose name was synonymous with toughness and skill. He had mastered martial arts, fought in countless high-profile matches, and became a global icon. To disrespect him like that seemed reckless, even for someone as confident as Jason. The media exploded with the news of Jason's comments. Social media was flooded with debates, memes, and opinions. Some people supported Jason, saying he was just showing confidence and that he had the right to call out whoever he wanted. Others, however, were shocked by his disrespect. "Does he not know who Chuck Norris is?" one tweet read. "This is a huge mistake," another warned. In the weeks that followed, Jason's arrogance only grew. He continued to taunt Norris in interviews, mocking his age and his supposed inability to compete in a modern ring. "If Chuck Norris is as tough as they say, he should take me on," Jason said. "I'll put him in his place and show the world who's really the king of the ring, and it won't take more than a couple of minutes to do it." The more Jason spoke, the more he convinced himself that defeating Norris would be an easy victory. After all, he had beaten opponents with decades of experience. How hard could it be to beat an old man? He trained even harder for his upcoming fight, focusing on his speed, his strength, and his boxing techniques. He didn't bother studying Norris's style or his past achievements. To Jason, it wasn't necessary. He was confident in his abilities and felt that no one, not even Chuck Norris, could touch him. But not everyone was on Jason's side. Some of his fellow boxers, even those who had been around longer than he had, tried to warn him. They told him that Chuck Norris was no ordinary fighter, that his experience was beyond anything Jason had ever faced. They urged him to show respect and not underestimate the power of someone who had achieved so much in the sport. But Jason wasn't having it. He wasn't interested in taking advice from older fighters who, in his mind, had already seen their best days. He was the future of boxing, and the future, as far as he was concerned, was all about raw power and speed. As the days passed, Jason's fans rallied behind him, some even making "Knockout Chuck" t-shirts and chanting his name. They believed in his promise to take down the legend in a matter of minutes. The fight was hyped up like no other, with the media feeding into Jason's bravado and selling the idea of a young, cocky fighter taking on a washed-up old man. But there was one problem. Chuck Norris hadn't accepted the challenge. At least not yet. Norris, known for his calm demeanor and legendary humility, had remained silent through all of Jason's taunts. He didn't need to respond to the young boxer's insults. But the media wouldn't let the story die, and as the pressure mounted, Norris made a surprising announcement. He would fight Jason. It wasn't a challenge accepted out of anger or spite. Norris wasn't interested in proving something to the cocky young boxer. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity to show respect for the sport and to teach Jason an important lesson about humility. But Jason didn't see it that way. To him, it was just another fight, and he would win it like he had every other fight before it, quickly and easily. As the date for the match approached, Jason's confidence reached new heights. He was unstoppable, unbeatable. No one could match his power. No one could match his speed. And certainly no one could match his arrogance. But as he continued to trash-talk Norris, one thought lingered in the back of his mind. What if he had underestimated Chuck Norris? Deep down, Jason wasn't sure, but he pushed the thought aside. He had never lost before, and he wasn't about to start now. The fight was on, and Jason, the Bull, Carter, was ready to show the world just who the true king of the ring was. The day Chuck Norris announced that he would accept Jason Carter's challenge sent shockwaves through the boxing world. The media couldn't believe it, and neither could the fans. Everyone was waiting to see how this unlikely match would unfold. On one side, there was Jason, the Bull, Carter, the cocky young boxer with an undefeated record and a mouth that ran faster than his fists. On the other side, there was Chuck Norris, a living legend in martial arts, a former world champion who had spent decades building his reputation as one of the toughest men alive. To most, it seemed like an impossible matchup. Jason, however, wasn't worried. If anything, the fact that Norris had agreed to fight him only added fuel to his already massive ego. The media had been eating up his trash talk for weeks, and now they would finally get to see him back up his words in the ring. He couldn't wait to show everyone that he was the real deal, that he was the future of boxing, and no one could stand in his way, not even a legend like Norris. The world waited eagerly as the fight date drew closer. Fans from all over the globe began to place their bets, some of them backing the younger, faster, stronger boxer, while others believed that Norris's experience and legendary status would prevail. On social media, the debate raged on. "Jason's got this," one comment read. "Chuck's too old to keep up with him," another one said. "Norris is a legend for a reason, don't underestimate him," warned a third. Jason continued to train with all the confidence in the world. He worked on his speed, his footwork, and his punching power. His team was confident that they had prepared him for anything Norris could throw at him. After all, this wasn't a fight about martial arts or kicks. This was a boxing match, and Jason had proven time and time again that no one could match his skills in that department. He focused on his cardio, his uppercut, and his devastating right hook, which had knocked out so many opponents. To him, it was just another day at the office, another opponent to defeat, another victory to claim. But there was a small part of him that couldn't shake the thought of Chuck Norris. He had heard the stories, of course, the rumors about his martial arts prowess and his incredible endurance. People said that Norris had once defeated multiple opponents in a single night. Others claimed he had broken boards with a single punch, and some even joked that his kicks could stop time. Jason laughed these stories off. They were just that, stories. The reality was that Norris was an older man and no one could stay at the top forever. Jason wasn't going to let the tales of Norris's past affect him. He was the present and the future. Norris was simply in his way. The closer the fight got, the more Jason's ego swelled. He couldn't stop himself from taunting Norris at every opportunity. At press conferences, he would joke about how easy the fight would be. "I've been hitting guys half his age and they couldn't handle me," Jason said, grinning. "Chuck's gonna find out the hard way that I'm too fast, too strong, and too skilled for someone like him." The media laughed along with him, as if it was just a game. After all, what could a 70-year-old man do in the ring against a fighter at the peak of his career? Chuck Norris, on the other hand, remained silent. He didn't respond to Jason's insults or trash talk. To him, the fight was not about words, it was about action. His calm demeanor only fueled Jason's arrogance further. If Norris wasn't going to defend himself, then Jason would continue to run his mouth. He would prove once and for all that he was the better fighter. He trained harder, pushed his limits further, and felt more confident with each passing day. But in the quiet moments when Jason was alone with his thoughts, a nagging question lingered. What if Chuck Norris wasn't like the other opponents? What if his calm and quiet nature meant something more? Jason quickly pushed these thoughts aside. He had to focus. He couldn't afford to doubt himself now, not with everything on the line. This was the biggest fight of his career, and he had to make sure he came out on top. Meanwhile, Norris continued to prepare in his own way. Unlike Jason, he didn't have to show off in front of the cameras. His training was focused, disciplined, and kept out of the public eye. For him, this fight wasn't about regaining some long-lost glory. It was about respecting the sport of boxing and teaching Jason an important lesson, one that would resonate with both Jason and the fans who had followed the build-up to this fight. As the fight night approached, the tension between the two fighters grew. Jason's camp remained confident, but they couldn't ignore the fact that something was different about this fight. Jason's training was intense, but there was a subtle sense of unease in the air. Was this truly going to be as easy as he thought? Would Norris surprise him with something he didn't expect? Jason pushed the thoughts aside, refusing to let them affect his mindset. The night before the fight, Jason lay awake in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling. His mind was racing with scenarios: what he would do if Norris tried to land a punch, how he would counter if Norris got too close. He thought about how he would dance around Norris, making him look foolish in front of the whole world. Jason had played out every moment in his mind, rehearsing his moves, his words, and his victory speech. He had already envisioned himself standing over Norris, holding the championship belt aloft, basking in the glory of his win. But there was one thing that still gnawed at him. It wasn't just the fight itself, it was the unknown. How would Norris fight? Would he live up to the stories, or was this just a chance for an older man to step into the ring and prove he still had what it took? Jason didn't know the answer, but he wasn't going to let it stop him. He was confident, and that was all that mattered. He would take the ring, defeat Norris, and continue his path to becoming the greatest boxer of all time. The night ended, and the fight was now only hours away. Jason couldn't sleep. He had spent too much time thinking about what would happen if Norris actually lived up to his reputation. But as the clock ticked closer to fight time, he pushed all doubts from his mind. When the bell rang, he would be ready to show the world just who was the real champion. The day of the fight had finally arrived. It was an event that everyone had been talking about for weeks, if not months. The buzz surrounding the matchup between Jason, the Bull Carter, the young and cocky undefeated boxer, and Chuck Norris, the legendary martial artist and former champion, had reached a fever pitch. Fans filled the arena, their excitement palpable, while the media swarmed, capturing every moment leading up to the fight. Cameras flashed, interviews were conducted, and the atmosphere was electric. Jason, as usual, was full of confidence. He walked into the arena with a swagger, his head held high, the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wore his signature cocky grin, knowing that this fight would solidify his place as the new face of boxing. No matter how much trash talk he had thrown at Norris, deep down, Jason was ready. He had been training for this moment, pushing himself beyond his limits in the gym. He believed in his speed, his agility, and his knockout power. He was certain that no one, especially not an old man like Chuck Norris, could match his skills. His corner was full of support. His trainer, his manager, and his closest friends all stood by him, telling him that this was just another fight to win. "You've got this," his trainer said, clapping him on the back. "Just keep doing what you do best, and it'll be over in no time." Jason nodded, absorbing the words, but his mind was elsewhere. The crowd's chants and cheers didn't faze him. He had been through bigger crowds, bigger moments. This was his time to shine. As the bell rang for the start of the fight, Jason immediately took his stance in the ring, his body tense and ready. The crowd's roar grew louder, and for a moment, Jason allowed himself a glance at his opponent. Chuck Norris, dressed simply in his boxing shorts, stood across from him. Norris's expression was calm, serene, even his eyes steady but not aggressive. He was the picture of quiet confidence, almost like he had done this 1,000 times before. To many in the audience, Norris seemed to be the embodiment of the calm before the storm. To Jason, he seemed like the old man he had mocked in interviews, just a shadow of the fighter he once was. The first round began. Jason came out strong, his fists flying with precision. He moved quickly around Norris, landing a few jabs to his opponent's head and torso. The crowd cheered as Jason danced around the ring, his footwork smooth and calculated. He felt the rush of adrenaline. This was what he had been training for, and he was good at it. He could already feel the victory within his grasp. He had done the same thing to dozens of other opponents, and this would be no different. But Chuck Norris didn't move like the fighters Jason had faced before. He wasn't fast, but his movements were deliberate, measured. Norris didn't seem to be trying to hit Jason back immediately. Instead, he was watching, waiting, learning Jason's rhythm. For every punch Jason threw, Norris slipped or blocked it with a calmness that Jason couldn't quite comprehend. It was like he was facing a fighter who already knew his every move before it even happened. Jason's frustration began to grow. He landed a couple of solid punches, but it didn't faze Norris. His opponent didn't even flinch. Jason tried to press forward, but Norris's defense was impenetrable. It was as if Norris wasn't even trying to win the fight yet. He was simply waiting for the right moment to strike. The round came to an end, and Jason returned to his corner, wiping sweat from his brow, a slight furrow on his forehead. "Keep it up, kid," his trainer said, though there was a hint of concern in his voice. "You've got him where you want him." Jason nodded, trying to shake off the feeling that something was off. He wasn't worried yet. After all, he had come this far. But as he listened to the crowd cheer for him, something was nagging at him. He couldn't deny that Norris was a tougher opponent than he had initially thought. The second round began, and Jason came out even more aggressively. He threw punch after punch, trying to catch Norris off guard, but again, Norris dodged and parried with ease. It was as if he was toying with Jason. Norris's counterattacks were sharp, but they were not yet aimed at doing real damage. Jason's fists landed on Norris's gloves and arms, but each time, Norris seemed to absorb the blows effortlessly. Jason started to press harder, desperate to land a clean hit, but each attempt felt more futile than the last. He could hear the crowd murmuring, sensing that something wasn't right. Jason's pride wouldn't let him back down. He pushed harder, his punches coming faster and wilder. But Norris didn't flinch. He didn't react in anger or frustration. Instead, he moved with the grace of someone who had been in far more difficult situations than this. He was in complete control of his body and the fight. Jason's heart rate increased as he began to tire. His punches weren't landing as cleanly as before, and his breath came in heavier gasps. He could feel the sweat dripping down his face and his muscles burning with each move. For the first time in the fight, Jason realized that this wasn't going to be as easy as he had thought. Norris, on the other hand, seemed calm as ever. The only thing that gave away his intentions were his eyes, calm, focused, and locked on Jason. It was almost like Norris was waiting for something. Jason wasn't sure what that something was, but it wasn't something he was prepared for. He had underestimated his opponent, and now he was starting to feel the consequences. The bell rang, signaling the end of the second round, and Jason returned to his corner. His trainer looked at him, eyes narrowing as he wiped the sweat from his face. "You need to slow down. You're not fighting with your head, you're fighting with your ego. You can't keep going like this." Jason shook his head, his mind racing. He couldn't stop now. This was his moment, and he couldn't back down. But deep down, he could feel the tension growing in the pit of his stomach. Chuck Norris was more than just an old man. He was more than just a former champion. He was a living legend, and Jason was starting to realize that he might have underestimated him in a way that would cost him. The third round was about to begin. The arena buzzed with energy, and the crowd could feel the shift in the air. Jason, once so full of confidence, was now faced with the realization that this fight wasn't just about speed or power. It was about experience, about knowing how to survive in the ring when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Jason had only just begun to understand what it meant to fight someone like Chuck Norris. As the third round progressed, Jason began to realize that his earlier confidence had been misplaced. He had expected to walk into the ring, dominate, and finish Chuck Norris off in a matter of minutes. But instead, he found himself struggling to land a solid punch. The more he fought, the more he understood how out of sync he was with his own plan. His punches, which had previously been sharp and precise, now seemed wild and off-target. The energy he had been feeding off of at the start of the fight was starting to fade. His body was growing tired, and his breathing was heavier. Across the ring, Chuck Norris remained calm and collected. His movements were smooth, like a seasoned dancer effortlessly gliding through the steps of a well-rehearsed routine. He was not showing any signs of fatigue, not rushing or hurrying. Each time Jason came in for a strike, Norris moved with deliberate precision, evading the attack with minimal effort. For a moment, it was almost like time slowed down for Jason, and in that moment, he realized how deeply he had underestimated the legendary fighter standing across from him. Jason's frustration began to build, and with it came a dangerous sense of anger. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing in front of so many people. He had always been the one to come out on top, the one to take charge. But now, he felt like he was in a fight he hadn't prepared for. Chuck Norris wasn't just avoiding his punches. He was controlling the flow of the fight, making Jason feel more and more out of place in the ring. For the first time, Jason had the sinking feeling that he might not win this fight. In the middle of the round, Jason threw another powerful right hook, hoping to catch Norris off guard. But Norris, with his uncanny reflexes, simply stepped back, letting the punch sail past him. Before Jason could adjust, Norris moved in quickly, using his left hand to gently deflect Jason's follow-up jab. Jason's body lurched forward, caught off balance by Norris's subtle move. The audience gasped, watching as Jason stumbled, trying to regain his footing. Jason's anger flared as he took a step back to reset. He was no longer thinking about technique. His mind was clouded with frustration, and he lashed out again with a series of quick punches. Each time he tried to attack, Norris moved effortlessly, stepping aside or deflecting the punches with minimal movement. It was like Jason was fighting a shadow, one that was always one step ahead. His attacks were becoming wilder, and his frustration began to cloud his judgment. "You can't win like this," Jason muttered to himself, trying to refocus. His mind was racing. "He's just an old man. Why can't I hit him? Why can't I end this?" In that moment, Jason heard Norris's voice, calm but firm, cutting through his thoughts. "You're letting your anger control you. That's not the way to win a fight." It took a second for the words to sink in. Norris wasn't yelling or taunting him. He wasn't even looking at Jason with any malice. He was just speaking the truth in a matter-of-fact way, as if he were coaching Jason instead of fighting him. This wasn't just a fight in the ring. It was a lesson, one Jason wasn't sure he was ready to learn. Jason, still filled with frustration, took a deep breath and tried to shake off the sting of Norris's words. He had always relied on his speed, his agility, and his raw power to overwhelm his opponents. But now, against someone as calm and controlled as Norris, those traits weren't enough. Norris's defense was impeccable, and his counterattacks were swift, yet controlled. Jason had always believed that sheer force and fast hands would get him through any fight. But now, he was learning the hard way that there was so much more to boxing than just throwing punches. Jason's punches were coming slower now, his body tiring under the pressure. His hands felt heavier, and his movements less sharp. Norris seemed to glide effortlessly around him, his movements so graceful it was almost as if he wasn't even trying. Jason's confidence had shattered piece by piece, and with each passing moment, the truth became clearer. He had grossly underestimated Chuck Norris. As Jason began to tire, Norris took advantage of the openings in his defense. It wasn't a flurry of wild punches that landed. Instead, Norris delivered quick jabs, almost like reminders to Jason of who was in control. A soft tap here, a sharp strike there. Jason could feel the sting of each blow, but it wasn't the pain that hurt the most. It was the humiliation. Norris wasn't trying to destroy him. He was merely teaching him the value of patience, discipline, and strategy. Jason's frustration boiled over in the fourth round. With a roar, he charged at Norris, throwing a flurry of punches in every direction. His adrenaline was coursing through him, and he felt a surge of power like never before. But once again, Norris effortlessly dodged and blocked, moving with such skill that it was as if he had memorized every move Jason would make before it even happened. The crowd was silent now, a mix of disbelief and awe settling over the arena. They had been expecting a knockout, a quick and flashy victory from the young champion. But instead, they were witnessing something entirely different, a lesson in humility delivered by the most unlikely teacher. Jason's body was aching, and his frustration reached its peak. He was now desperate. With a sudden burst of energy, he threw everything he had into one final all-out punch, hoping that this would be the one to end it. But as he swung, Norris stepped inside his guard, ducking under the punch and grabbing Jason by the wrist. With surprising speed, Norris spun him around, pulling him off balance and sending him crashing to the mat. The crowd gasped as Jason hit the canvas with a thud. The pain shot through his body, and for a moment he lay there, stunned. His mind was racing, but he couldn't process what had just happened. He had been so sure of his victory, so certain of his strength, that he hadn't prepared for this moment. Jason slowly pushed himself to his hands and knees, the weight of the fight, and of his own arrogance sinking in. His corner called out to him, but he didn't hear them. He was too lost in his own thoughts. Norris stood over him, calm as ever, watching him silently, giving him time to recover. Jason's mind was filled with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, embarrassment, confusion. He had underestimated Norris, and now he was paying the price. But the most unsettling thing of all was the realization that he still wasn't sure how to win this fight. Norris wasn't like anyone he had ever faced before. The bell rang for the end of the round, but the fight had already shifted. Jason had come into this match with a plan, to prove that he was the best, to show that he was untouchable. But now, after being knocked down and humbled, Jason knew that he had so much more to learn, not just about boxing, but about the respect that every fighter should have for their opponents. The bell for the 5th round rang, and Jason slowly made his way back to the center of the ring. His body felt heavy, each movement a little slower than the last. He could feel the ache in his muscles, the weariness creeping into his bones. His breathing was labored, and his mind was clouded with doubt. The fight was no longer the easy victory he had expected. With each round, Jason had been forced to confront the fact that he had underestimated Chuck Norris. The crowd had fallen silent. They could sense the shift in the fight. At the start, they had believed Jason would win easily, but now they watched with bated breath, unsure of what would happen next. The young boxer, once brimming with arrogance and confidence, was now struggling to hold onto his composure. Chuck Norris, on the other hand, seemed untouched by the struggle. His calmness was unnerving to Jason. Norris didn't seem tired, didn't seem bothered by the pressure. He stood there, his posture relaxed, eyes fixed on Jason as though he was simply waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment, Jason realized, might be closer than he thought. Jason's corner shouted words of encouragement, urging him to press forward to find his rhythm again. But deep down, Jason knew the truth. His rhythm had been shattered by Norris's precision, by his ability to stay cool and control the pace of the fight. Jason had been quick, but Norris was smarter. And now, as the 5th round began, Jason realized that his speed and strength were no longer enough to carry him through. He stepped toward Norris, fists raised, but this time there was hesitation in his movements. He couldn't quite shake the image of Norris moving effortlessly around him, blocking and dodging with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. Jason tried to push the doubt out of his mind, but it lingered. Norris hadn't even broken a sweat, and Jason, despite his training and his speed, was beginning to feel the toll of the fight. Norris was waiting, his eyes scanning Jason's every move, looking for the smallest opening. Jason swung a right hook, hoping to catch Norris off guard. But Norris, like before, anticipated the move before Jason even completed it. With a swift movement, Norris ducked under the punch, stepping inside Jason's guard. Before Jason could react, Norris's hand shot up, gripping his wrist in a firm hold, spinning him around like a rag doll. The move was so fast, so precise, that Jason barely had time to register what had happened. He stumbled, struggling to keep his balance, but Norris didn't give him a chance to recover. With a sudden burst of force, Norris swept his leg behind Jason's, tripping him and sending him crashing to the canvas. Jason hit the mat with a heavy thud, the air knocked out of his lungs. For a moment, everything went still. He lay there, staring up at the ceiling, trying to catch his breath. The crowd gasped in shock, and Jason's corner was shouting his name, urging him to get up. But Jason couldn't move. The pain in his body was sharp, and for the first time in the fight, he felt the weight of his own arrogance. He had come into this ring thinking that his speed and power would be enough. He had underestimated the power of experience, the precision of a fighter who had spent his life learning how to read and anticipate every move. He had believed that he was invincible, but now he was lying on the mat, struggling to breathe. Norris stood over him, not in a stance of victory, but with quiet calm, offering Jason the time he needed to recover. He hadn't thrown a single unnecessary punch, hadn't shown any sign of overexertion. To Norris, this was just another fight, another lesson for the young boxer who had refused to listen. Jason slowly pushed himself up, his hands trembling. He glanced at Norris, who was already backing away, giving him space to rise. Norris's face remained calm, his eyes locked onto Jason's, as if silently telling him to get back up and face him. Jason felt his pride burning. He couldn't let Norris win like this. He couldn't let himself be the fighter who was knocked down, who was humbled in front of the entire world. He had to get back up. He had to prove that he could still win, that he could still be the champion he had claimed to be. With great effort, Jason pulled himself to his feet, steadying himself with the ropes. The crowd cheered as he stood, his chest heaving with each breath. He wiped the sweat from his face, and for the first time in the fight, he looked at Norris not with anger or arrogance, but with respect. Norris's calmness, his mastery of the ring, had broken through Jason's tough exterior. He realized that this fight was never about just winning, it was about learning, and Jason had a lot left to learn. The referee signaled that the fight could continue, and the bell rang for the final round. Jason took a deep breath, trying to regain his focus. His body was exhausted, his mind was clouded, but he had one final chance to prove himself. He wasn't going to give up. He couldn't. Jason moved forward, this time with more caution. His punches were slower now, more deliberate, as if he was trying to make every move count. He knew he couldn't waste energy throwing punches that wouldn't land. He had to be smarter. He had to be better. But Norris was still one step ahead. As Jason came in with a left jab, Norris stepped to the side, slipping past the punch and landing a quick jab to Jason's ribs. Jason staggered back, but he regained his balance quickly, pressing forward once more. This time, his footwork was sharper, his punches more controlled. He knew he had to adjust if he had any hope of winning. The fight was no longer about overpowering his opponent. It wasn't about brute strength or speed. It was about outsmarting Norris, finding the tiny gaps in his defense and capitalizing on them. Jason focused on his footwork, his breathing, and his timing, trying to match Norris's every move. But Norris wasn't slowing down. He was still moving with the same grace and precision that had left Jason scrambling earlier in the fight. And then, just as Jason thought he had found an opening, Norris struck. It was fast, too fast for Jason to react. Norris's right hand shot out like a bolt of lightning, catching Jason square on the jaw. The impact was so sudden, so powerful, that Jason's vision blurred. His body went limp, and before he knew it, he was falling once again, this time to the canvas with no strength to lift himself. The sound of the crowd faded as Jason hit the mat. The referee began his count, but Jason's body refused to move. He lay there, the world spinning around him, the fight over. It wasn't the knockout he had imagined, but it was the knockout he had earned, the one that taught him the hard truth about underestimating someone who had mastered the craft of fighting. As the referee counted down, Jason's mind was filled with one thought. He had learned a lesson he would never forget. The crowd held its collective breath as Jason lay motionless on the canvas. The sound of the referee's count echoed in the arena, each second a painful reminder of how far Jason had fallen from his earlier bravado. He could feel the coolness of the mat beneath him, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to blur. His body ached and his thoughts felt sluggish, as though the weight of the fight had somehow managed to drain every ounce of energy from him. The referee's count reached 10. It was over. The bell rang, and the arena erupted into a mix of gasps and applause. Jason remained on the mat, his mind spinning. He had been knocked out, and not by some fluke or accident, but by the sheer skill and experience of his opponent, Chuck Norris. The weight of it all hit Jason like a ton of bricks. He had been so sure, so confident that his speed and power would carry him through this fight. But instead, he found himself here, humbled in front of thousands of fans and millions watching from home. As Jason slowly regained his senses, he heard the announcer's voice calling the fight in favor of Chuck Norris. The words felt like a blur to him. His ears rang, but in that moment nothing felt real. He blinked a few times, pushing himself up with shaky arms. The pain in his head was unbearable, and he could barely stand on his feet. But somehow he managed to rise to a kneeling position, his eyes slowly meeting Norris's calm, unwavering gaze. Norris had already raised his hand in victory, but his expression was not one of triumph. There was no arrogance in his eyes, no gloating. Instead, he looked down at Jason with quiet respect. Jason's breath caught in his chest. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. He had been prepared for mockery, for insults, for the smug satisfaction of an old man who had finally proven himself against a younger, cocky fighter. But that wasn't what he saw. What he saw was a fighter who had nothing to prove, a man who had already earned his place in history and didn't need to belittle Jason to feel good about his victory. For the first time in the entire fight, Jason felt the weight of his arrogance. He had come into the ring thinking he was invincible, that his youth and strength could overcome anything. But now, lying there, humiliated and defeated, he understood the lesson that Norris had been teaching him all along. It wasn't just about physical strength. It wasn't about raw power or speed. It was about respect for the craft, the patience to wait for the right moment, and the wisdom to know that every fight is won with both the body and the mind. Norris hadn't just defeated him in the ring. He had dismantled his entire approach to boxing. Jason was helped to his feet by the referee, and as the crowd cheered, Jason looked around, his eyes scanning the faces of the people who had once cheered him on. He could feel their judgment in the air, their disappointment. He had promised them a victory, but instead, he had fallen flat on his face. He felt small, insignificant in front of everyone who had believed in him. His ego had been shattered, and the realization of how much he had taken for granted was overwhelming. Chuck Norris approached him, his steps calm and deliberate, as though he were walking toward an old friend rather than his opponent. Jason stood there unsure of what to expect, but ready to accept whatever came next. Norris stopped in front of him, looking into his eyes. For a moment there was silence between them, the weight of the fight hanging in the air. Then Norris spoke, his voice low but clear. "You've got potential," Norris said, his tone firm but not unkind. "But potential means nothing if you don't learn to respect your opponents. You can't win every fight with power alone. It's about discipline, patience, and learning when to move and when to wait. You've got the heart of a champion, but you need to learn the mind of one." Jason swallowed hard, the words sinking in deeper than any punch had. He nodded, barely able to speak through the lump in his throat. I didn't think it would be like this," he admitted, his voice shaky. I thought I could just overpower you. I thought that was enough." Chuck Norris gave him a small smile, a gesture of understanding. "It's a mistake a lot of fighters make," he said. "But it's a lesson learned, and that's what counts. You've got a long way to go, but if you're willing to listen, you'll be better for it." The crowd, sensing the sincerity of Norris's words, cheered once again, but this time it wasn't for the knockout. It was for the lesson, one that Jason had learned the hard way. Jason looked at Norris, his eyes filled with gratitude and humility. He had come into the fight thinking he was the future of boxing. But now, after being knocked down both physically and mentally, he realized that the true future of boxing was about more than just raw talent. It was about respect, growth, and the willingness to learn from every experience, no matter how painful. As Jason walked out of the ring, he could feel the weight of his defeat, but there was also something else. A sense of clarity, a sense of purpose. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about his next victory or how he could silence his critics. He was thinking about how he could improve, how he could learn from the best, and how he could one day earn the respect of fighters like Chuck Norris. The journey ahead of him would be long, and the road would be filled with challenges. But for the first time, Jason was ready to face those challenges with humility, with the knowledge that every step forward would require not just strength, but wisdom. And in the end, that was what would make him a true champion,